So we've got our camera set up, we've got our animation of our scaling of our text set up. We want to create this secondary motion, this overlapping, the follow-through motion where our text kind of jiggles after it's done something. So we're going to do that with another type of effector. So if we go up to our MoGraph menu where we find our effectors, we've got an effector called a delay effector. So I'm just going to go up to that menu and create a delay effector. Now, does anything happen? No. Okay. Here's my delay effector. When I have a look at its attributes, what I'm interested in is the effector tab, and there's a setting in here called the mode of this delay effector. There's a mode that's called spring, and it creates an automatic elasticy kind of spring motion to any MoGraph object that's moving. So you will probably end up using this a lot in MoGraph. Okay, so there it is. We've got our delay effector. There it is. It's set to spring. That's pretty much it. All we need to do now is apply this effector to these letters. So we're going to do it exactly the same way that we did it with our scale effector. So I'm going to select my MoText object. I'm going to go to the Letters tab. There's my scale effector. I'm going to drag and drop my delay effector underneath it. So now it's going to scale, and then there's going to be the springy delay. So let's hit play and see if that works. That's pretty cool. So what Cinema4D is doing is it's looking at the first effector, which is a scaling up effect, and then it's calculating that movement and then automatically creating a springy follow-through type of effect. Now we can change the amount of springiness. You can just leave this playing. If you go back to your delay effector, there's a strength slider under the effector tab. So if you set that lower, you get a much smaller effect. If you set it higher, up towards 100%, you get something pretty crazy. Okay, so what we can control with this strength slider, we can actually control the style of animation. And that's one thing that you really have to think about as you start to get more into animation. Not only do we want to set keyframes and get things working and moving to the places we want them to in the time we want, but the way that they move controls the style of the animation. If we want a really linear robotic type of motion, we're not going to have a big spring delay on anything. It's all going to be very straight lined, very sharp, short animation style. But if we want something quite cartoony or quite fun, then we're really going to start to emphasize these types of effects. So this is how we create style with our animation. I'm going to leave mine on somewhere around 50%, so it's not too crazy. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some other effectors into this system because we can combine effectors together. I'm just going to pause this, and I'm just going to pause it where my text is revealed because I'm going to make another effector. In the example movie that I made, the text, it not only scaled up, but it actually spun around as well. It rotated as it revealed. So I'm going to make another plane effector that rotates my, my text around. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. I'll do it the same way that we made the first effector, just for consistency. So I'm going to go to my MoGraph menu, I'm going to go to Effector, I'm going to make another plane effector. Now this plane effector is going to control the rotation of my letters. I want them to spin and tumble a whole bunch more as they appear. So I'm going to rename this before I do anything else because I've got a couple of plane effectors in here now, and I'm going to call this plane rot for rotation. You can call it whatever you want. Okay, so I'm going to select this plane effector. I'm going to go to its parameter tab. I'm going to turn off position. I'm not interested in that. I want to turn on rotation. Now I'm going to have each of the letters spin around maybe 360 degrees, so do a full circle. Now one thing you might notice under the rotation is it's got rotation H, P and B. This is a quirk of Cinema4D. It does have the three axes, X, Y and Z, but it defaults to heading, pitch and bearing, which they're kind of like aviation kind of controls. You know, it's what planes do, heading, pitch and bearing. I don't know why they're in there. That's just the way that Cinema4D is designed. In some places in the interface you can change that to XYZ, but I don't think you can do it here. I don't know exactly which axes they relate to. I think it's XYZ top to bottom. Doesn't really matter too much because we're going to make these all rotate. So I'm going to put in 360 degrees for all of these, which means as my text is revealed, it's going to spin 360 degrees in all axes. Okay, so there's my rotation effector. I'm rotating in all sorts of angles. Nothing's happening to my text yet because I haven't applied it to that MoText. So let's do that. Let's go to MoText, select that, go to our Letters tab, and we're going to drag and drop that rotation effect in there. Now, nothing seems to be happening. What we might need to do while we're setting this up, we've got these other effectors in here. They may be interfering with this effector as we set it up. So I'm going to turn off the scale effector and I'm going to turn off the delay effector. Oh, the other thing I've just realized, that rotation effector, it probably is working, but I've set 360 degrees for all the axes. So they've all just gone straight back to where they started from. So maybe if I did something other than 360 degrees, oh, look, there we go. So that was me tricking myself. I did that on purpose, just to see if you guys were onto it. Honest. Okay, so yes, this is working. That's great. Excellent. So, the same thing we need to do now for this rotation effector, we need to do the same thing that we did for the scale effector. We need to set up the fall off so that this happens over time. We can reveal it by animating from side to side. So let's set that up next. Let's go to our rotation effector. Let's go to its fall off. And instead of having an infinite fall off, we're going to set it up exactly the same way that we did with our scale effector. We're going to set a linear fall off. And we're going to change the orientation along the x-axis because we're animating it sliding along that x-axis. So in my plane effector, which is doing the rotation, I've gone to the fall off tab, changed the shape of my fall off to linear, and changed the orientation to X. So once I've done that, I should be able to test that deformer, that effector, by grabbing my move tool and sliding it side to side. And yep, I've got some crazy spinny animation going on. Excellent. Now again, the same thing is happening. As I slide my effector from side to side, my text starts off in the position I want it to end, and as I slide across, it ends up in the position I want it to start. So I need to do that invert thing that we did with the scale effector. So in our rotation effector, under the fall off tab, let's turn on that invert effect. So now my text is going to start rotated, and then it's going to straighten out as I slide this through it. So that's working. Okay. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go through, there's a couple more steps. I'm going to go through this and then I'll back up again and go through it more slowly. What I want to do is I want the animation of my rotation to be similar to my scale in terms of timing, but what would be kind of cool is if it scales and rotates, and if those two sets of animations are offset slightly in time. The other thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that my rotation effector happens at the same speed or with my scale effector. So I'm going to use a little trick of parenting, which you guys might have used in different bits of software. It's when you get one object or one asset or one thing in a project or a scene to follow something else. What I want is my rotation effector to follow my scale effector. I'm going to take my timeline back to the start of my animation, and I'm going to position my rotation effector just to the left, just behind my scale effector. And I know which one's which because I've got them named and I'm just selecting them from my object list. So I've moved my rotation effector just to the left of my scale effector, and what I want it to do is I want it to follow, I want it to be parented so it follows along with my scale effector. To do that, in my object list, I can drag and drop my rotation effector onto my scale effector. So if I click, drag and drop it, you'll see there's a little arrow icon appears. As you put an object over the top of another object, the little arrow points downwards. That means that when you drop it, that object will become a child of the other one. So it's a hierarchy. It's called a parent-child relationship. The object to the left is the parent, the one underneath it and inwards is the child. So that means that this object will follow that one. And I can test that if I click and drag in my timeline. That rotation effector is now following my scale effector. So that's cool. So I've animated my rotation effector without setting any keyframes. Don't worry, I'll come back to this again. Okay, so that's cool. Now the other thing is I did turn off my other effectors before. I'm just going to turn them back on so I can test this. In my Mo text, under my letters tab, I'll just turn my effectors back on. I'm going to hit play. And that's starting to do its thing. There's one more trick here. And again, I'm going to go over the stuff again. At the moment, I seem to have lost that delay effect. My letters, they're scaling up and appearing, and they're doing a crazy rotation, but that delay seems to have disappeared. The reason for it is if we look at the Mo text and look at the effectors in this letters list, the order that these effectors are in is really important. Cinema4D calculates them from the top to the bottom. We want the scale to happen, then the rotation, then that springy delay. So we can click and drag these effectors and we can change the order of them. And now with my delay at the bottom, it's getting calculated last, so my effectors seem to be doing their thing again. I might just turn up that delay just a little bit more under the effector tab. Okay, so now I've got two effectors, a delay effector, it's animated, it's starting to look pretty good, and there's a lot of confused faces.